Good afternoon, Mr. Monrao. How are you? You could always, I know you can't speak to us, but you can send in on Q&A. Better use Q&A than chat, as I will always be saying a little while from now. And well, I see a lot. Good evening, Kirti Bhai. Kirti Shah is also here, who is the founder president of INHAF. We have the convener of INHAF, Neeta Chalke, architect Neeta Chalke from Pune. I can see many heads of departments of schools of architecture and colleges of engineering. Professor Nagaraj is there. I can see Dr. Gayatri Ranki, Gagan Agarwal. Good evening, Gagan. These are all distinguished minds, distinguished people. He's an educationist and a consultant for IBM education, as well as for the Carleton University in Ottawa. That's Gagan Agarwal. Then I see Jaspreet Walia. Hello to you. Kanchana is another architect who is here. Many, many others. I can't be taking everybody's name. Manikandan, the founder of IHF, is also here, who is another distinguished person working on housing for affordable housing and housing for the poor and such. And now Ashok is a veteran structural rehabilitation person, interesting person. He has a story, and one day we'll listen to him too. He comes from Mysore. Good afternoon to those from the Makerere University in Kampala. I can see some of you there. And Peter, good evening. Shamsuddin, thank you for making it. I know the time is about 2 hours behind us. Jean, bonjour, nice to have you here. I know it must be about 12 for you there in Paris. Thank you for being here. I can see some others who are INHAF associates and friends of the larger network of INHAF from Europe who made time for this afternoon. As a matter of fact, we chose to make it 4:30 to 6 in order to facilitate those who are coming in from the West and those few from Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne. I don't see any names just now. People who are wanting to come in from there. Good afternoon once again, Shamsuddin, to you. You made it in time this time. Yesterday you had a challenge. Good afternoon again to you. Okay. All right. It's we are at 4:31. I don't think we should take any more time. First, I must greet our panelists. Where do I begin? Jaya Dhindaw. She is from the WRI. I'm not going to speak too much about what she represents just now, but eventually I will. We have Srikanth with us. He's from Bengaluru. He's Jaya City and wonderful guy. I called and asked him, and he didn't think about it at all. He said yes. A man who has stood for public purpose for many years. And Maheep Singh is also here. Maheep, I don't see you yet. He must be on the attendee list. From the studio, will one of you help him get onto the panelist sign up, please? One of you. It could be Radhika, it could be somebody else. We'll wait for him for a minute, probably. And thank you, DK Bhatt. DK Bhatt is the founder of Taru for development in Ahmedabad, Taru Leading Edge. Remarkable guy, I know him for 40 years. He's going to be one of the people who will possibly anchor a program for the Rethinking Cities series soon enough. He speaks from Ahmedabad, as I said. We'll wait for a couple of minutes more, if you don't mind, for Maheep Singh Thapar to come in. There he is. Maheep has come in. Maheep, will you also unblock your video? That will help us. Srikanth, I request you to also, yeah, there you are. There you are. Thank you for all of you being here. What can I say? This has taken us, it started with one innocuous mail that architect Kirti Shah wrote to some of us, must have been about 4, 5, 6 weeks ago. And he said, is there a way, and very innocently, is there a way that we can start some kind of a dialogue on this blessed thing called the webinars. And the next morning, I wrote him back saying that there could be a possibility of doing such a thing. I was coming from another context of having done a series of them. At that point in time, I must have done about 11, 12 webinars for a couple of other institutions that I also represent. And very quickly responded, as is characteristic of Kirti Bhai. It took us no more than a week, maybe 10 days, for us to settle down and say, okay, these are the people whom we can call, and set the canvas of interventions that that this series, this epic series, would carry. So, well, you know, from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., Kirti Bhai sat and wrote many mails to many people across the world and in India. And he said to himself and to all of us that INHAF is an enabling, a facilitating platform, not a mentoring platform. It's a platform that seeks to learn. It's a platform that is meant for others to see how they can articulate their concerns, share their sensibilities, and see how together, and that was a key word, together we are able to map these contours of urban India and the futures that we all have before us. Look at this, we have about 350 odd registrations. And I can tell you, if there is a hunger for exchanges of this kind, it is because we all are a little lost. Quite frankly, I have not been able to figure out how the world and how the future of this decade that we are turned into will pan out in the next few months or the next 6 months. 1970 was a turning point for the world's economy. We were at $1 trillion at that point of time. We are today at $89 to $91 trillion, depending on who is giving you the statistic. And in this time of about 50 years, the new liberal economic regime that started about that time has played out its part. If you listen to people like Harari, you will understand why I'm saying that. And I strongly urge you all to see how you will check out some of his writings, book I think about 4, 5, 6 months ago. This response, if it is as overwhelming, it is because we all seek to understand, to know how that future will unfold in this new decade and into the next decade, as Maheep Singh said this morning. Before I get to sharing a few more reflections with you all to set the context for this discussion with some of these vibrant minds that we have here with us at the studio in INHAF, let me set down some housekeeping hygiene quickly for all of you listeners out there. I know you're all leaders yourself, many of you, and so I would request you not to be offended by what I have to request you to do. The Secretariat will be sending you posts on various things that that we want you to know about INHAF and about City URI. I don't want to say more about it just now, and many other things, including those profiles of people who are there on the panel today. What I want you to do also is that you watch the chats on the chat box that we send you as updates and posts, while you send in your Q&A, your insights, your observations, perspectives, whatever they are, on the Q&A section, because that makes it easier for me to sort of track and ask the panelists again, or probably directly myself reflect upon what you want to share with us. There comes a time, as I've often said to people who know me well, in the destiny of a nation, when the collective consciousness and urge of her people cast directions that go far beyond the will of her politicians and the 1% wealth holders who govern economic destinies in many ways. The long march of those millions in India, how can we forget, who make the 90% economy that we saw for 4, 5 harrowing weeks, has changed things forever. The Long March had over 25 to 30 million people trudge their way back home from the chawls and slums of the cities that they worked in. It is a memory that has scarred them forever. Will they want to return to the city the way it is today? People, those from that generation who remember as children at the time, the post-partition days, weeks between August 12th, I think it was, to about September 4th or 5th, when 10 to 12 million people walked between these two borders, Punjab and the other side of Punjab, scarred the nation's memory. And here we have had about 28, 30 million people. We don't still have any official statistic on how many people moved, walked the hard tarmac over those years, over these weeks, the last, say, 5-6 weeks. I read this morning, the Hindu, it says that the most vulnerable to the spread of this pandemic will be the slum dweller. You put any three people together in a marketplace or some such, the third person, the guy who brings in your Swiggy stuff, or the guy who does those stuff for you, lives in a slum. He has had no education beyond class 6, beyond class 8, but he's dressed very well. He speaks English to an extent workable, and everybody around you. Tell me how you can lead your life without all those people who support things for you, from the driver to the maid to whoever else. And these are stories, thoughts that you have yourself reflected upon, and I don't want to add more. Our cities are not in good health. We all know that. Be it the economy, or the environment, or governance, or finance, or institutions, or slums, or sustainability, or mobility. Kirtibai says, with his characteristic passion, it is a seemingly endless list, he writes in one of his tirelessly done mails. It's a seemingly endless list depending upon where one starts and the stand you take from where you sit. I'm paraphrasing it. The Rethinking series is one small step in this giant effort to search for correctives. What are those correctives? We don't know. We are learning. This is a school to me. These thought seminars between now and maybe the next 30 weeks, 25 weeks, when we will have about 30 to 32 webinars of this kind, will tell us, will show us where we need to be going. This series is ambitious in design and intent and brings together a powerful confluence of over 100 eminent minds from across the world over the next, as I said, about 30 weeks. It's not an isolated event either. Kirtibai sees this as a concerted thought seminar that is meant to feed into an event even more ambitious called the City Uri Project. He seeks to run that project and this set of webinars with a host of about 40 plus individuals and institutional players who have come together, in a sense, to make this series happen. The project is a social or a societal effort, nothing less, to rethink our cities and to recalibrate our response to the country's urban challenge. This series is an instrument, a platform to befriend and to bring together many hundreds of you, dear listeners, who are experts and specialists yourselves. You who contribute, it is you who can contribute to the success of this larger intent and purpose. It's not just the panelists. We can only share a few thoughts. As a matter of fact, you would see today, we have again split this into about an hour that, the panelists will share some thoughts and concerns and such, and the rest of it with things that you will share on that Q&A window. As a matter of fact, Kirtibai was as passionate about it as to say that, there must be a way that we can have all of you, 300 plus of you, having access to audio. And I said, that is not going to be as effective. But the intent and the sentiment is that we see you all as partners in this process. Rethinking Cities as a series is an integral part, as I said, and I reiterate that, is an integral part of the Citizen Urban Initiative that was launched about early last year. You'll see in your chat box by now, I suppose, a short profile of this initiative. You'll see something about INHAF and so on. I would urge you to read it even as you engage with us today and raise questions, offer insights, share observations. So we will use the chat box and you will use the Q&A window. What else can I say? I will welcome all of you panelists, Jaya, Srikanth, and Maheep, once again. Thank you for being here. Thank you for consenting to be with so readily. Maheep is a town planner, as a matter of fact, and let him tell you about himself. But he's also, incidentally, a professional consultant for the Bengaluru Development Authority here on the comprehensive development and such, development plan and such. Jaya has been one of the phenomenal researchers. You know, the last time I heard her, she was talking about something called urban acupuncture. I don't know if she wants to speak about that today, but that's up to her. And Srikanth is one of those financial analysts. He's an IIM boy who eventually decided after some 15, 16 years of being an investment banker to get on to starting at some point of time something called the Bangalore Apartments Federation, for he saw a deficit there, a void that could be filled for all these people in what we call the middle class segment. People like you and I in many ways, who have this wrestle, this challenge on water, on energy and waste management if they are living in apartments. Jaya has been doing lots of work, and you will see on the chat box again, links to many of her stories, many of the research studies that she's sort of headed and presided over and directed. And Jaya has been with the World Resource Institute for maybe 4 or 5 years that I've known her. My last note before I get to calling the others. This again is an effort where leaders like these people who are sitting here who are development thinkers, who are practitioners, who seek to work together on a blueprint that can outline India's response to this large and complex urban challenge before us. Let me start with Jaya Dhindaw, after which I'll probably turn to the other two people. The format is this, all of you out there as listeners. We are telling ourselves that we will get the three of them to speak for about 2 minutes, give us a quick overview of what they want to present. After that, we go back in turn to Jaya and then to Srikanth and then to probably Maheep, in ways that they will make a very short and quick presentation, probably 7-8 minutes. Then we turn to you all to listen to you from among the participants. Go on, Jaya. Good evening once again to you.
Good evening, Hari, and thank you very much. Thank you to you, Kirti and INHAF for having me here for this conversation with the other illustrious panelists, and I'm very happy to be here today. So I'll just start by saying that, modern planning started in the 1800s, basically as a response to the degenerated environment owing to the Industrial Revolution that was happening in Europe. There was social degeneration, there were health issues that, had emerged in the society, and there was a severe need for planning so that, you don't impact the workers and the economy in turn. Then, Clarence Perry came about with his concepts of, a neighborhood unit and, defining a half-a-mile walking radius where all your necessities, all your services should be located, and how that was planned. And one of the interesting things was that he placed the arterial roads along the borders of the community. So the community was supposed to be this isolated unit surrounded by these roads where the cars could move. Eventually, all of these people theorized, things changed, and then we arrived at Thapar in early 2008, and he came up with his sustainable neighborhoods conception, where he said, okay, the mix of uses is okay, we are not going to segregate, but what we're going to do is still keep those arterials where the cars can move around. And so created this whole, concept where now the neighborhoods were there, but then getting through them was still, difficult, and they were still impermeable. Then we've had many other movements like new urbanism, smart cities, green cities, all of these have come about. And now we are faced with this whole COVID situation, the COVID-19 situation over the last, 3-4 months. And life has pretty much come a full circle because we started with planning as a response to a public health crisis, and we're back there again. And now we do have a chance to reboot. And so the question is, how will we build back better, so to speak? So just to kind of also introduce myself a little bit, I'm an urban planner, researcher, acupuncturist, and I'll explain that, what Hari mentioned earlier. And I'm working to help solve some of the, what I think are social engineering problems that arise out of a city's desire to have economic development, environmental integrity, equity, sustainability, all of these things. And one of the reasons that I do it is because my belief is that every little action that we are taking collectively as planners, as a community, which is evidence-based and based in science, moves the needle towards a more equitable, just future, which is needed for our cities. And I'm doing it for water, and I'm doing it for the children of
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, Srikanth, your quick word. Before that, back to the studio enough secretariat. I have a few people, Siddharth and a couple of others, who are saying that the audio is not right. Would you do something about checking that out, please, while I request Srikanth to see if he will take the mic. Over to you, Srikanth.
Thanks, Hari, and thanks, INHAF Kirti Bhai, for inviting me on this panel. Really glad to share the stage with Jaya and Maheep as well, and thanks to you, Hari. A quick background, as Hari rightly said, I've been in corporate for many, many years. I would say about 22 years, just running after money and business and all of that. And as I kept on spending time in Bengaluru, I've been living here in Bengaluru for.
Sorry, go on.
By the way, am I audible, Hari?
Yeah, very, very loud and clear. Yeah.
Great. So I've been living in Bangalore for well over 13, 14 years. And I'd been to Bengaluru, even though I didn't grow up in Bengaluru, I had been to Bengaluru in the 80s, visiting here, my relatives and so on. The gradual deterioration of the city has been extremely visible and palpable. You see it visibly, you see it visually, you see it and feel it perceptibly. And today, we believe that we are on the throes of disaster. And that's really what got quite a few of us into social life. So as you rightly said, a few years back, we started something called as Bangalore Apartments Federation. Honestly, it was not so much keeping in mind sustainability or anything of that sort. We started off because the government was clueless about many things. They started harassing apartments and apartment residents for faults of their own. So it was more anger at the incompetence and ineptitude of elected officials and civic agencies, which got us into that. But as the community started building up, today, the same Bangalore Apartments Federation is a 750 apartment complex strong, representing almost about 1.5 lakh households and 5 lakh people. As we started building that, we realized that citizens have a lot of power in their hands. When I say power, not just in terms of voting or denying people getting into power, etc., but actually in terms of bringing about grassroots change, if we're all able to do small little things at our respective levels. That's something that we believe we have done very successfully over the last 3-4 years, whether it's water management, whether it's energy conservation, whether it's solid waste management, etc. And that's really what gave me the confidence to say that there is hope. We can be optimistic about bringing change. And as of a few months back, I decided to take this one level further and jumped onto the political bandwagon, where quite a few of us frustrated citizens, while we citizens have been doing our bit, we still see the government and the municipal corporation, the agencies not doing their job. So we wanted to bring about change inside the system. So we started something called as Bengaluru NavaNirman Party, with an exclusive focus on Bengaluru and municipal governance to bring about a change to Bengaluru. So that's what I've been doing over the last few months exclusively. I've taken a break from work. So as part of that, we are trying to see how best we can get the government, the municipal authority, the civic agencies, and the citizens to work together to bring about these fundamental changes. More of that when I present a little bit later. Thanks, Hari.
Pretty strong, statements from Srikanth out there: incompetence, ineptitude, and such. Maheep, interestingly, Jaya talked about this chance that we have to reboot the economy. I know you will come from a larger perspective, given the fact that you are a master planner, town planner, and such. The reason I called Srikanth was this. I found that here is a person, like he spoke to you now, who's concerned centrally in those years, before he moved to becoming a politician at this new party that was formed at the turn of this year, called the Bengaluru NavaNirman Paksha. What was concerning him and me at the expert level, shall we say, and he from his level of advocacy, and people like Jaya from the context of, shall we say, research, as well as of trying to see what they can do to support businesses at the solutions levels is this. Look at the city. I mean, you know the city as well as I do, Maheep, though you live in Hyderabad. You have 1 crore people here. I'll stick to crores instead of millions because it's easier for most of us to understand crores and lakhs. Though some of my friends out there in Africa or Europe are going to be a little lost in this. 10 lakhs is 1 million for all of you out there. So 1 crore people or 10 million people and 135 crore liters of water, even if I were to go by the National Building Code's LPCD requirements for water. So we have 135 crore liters of water needed every day. That's 1.4 billion liters of water. We get as much if you were to look at the official statistic. But when you turn around and look at actually what is happening in the city, you find that there is about 38 by the official admission of the Water Supply Board, 38 to 40% of it lost in leaks and thefts. And so you have about 500 million liters of the 1,350 million liters, or 50 crore liters if you please, being lost every day. And we as the government now, pays about 100 rupees per every 1,000 liters of water that they supply to you. And that's only one statistic. If I were to talk to you about energy, you know how it is. And it's as dismal when it comes to waste or, you know, the challenges of air management and such. What would you want to say, Maheep, in that quick overview, after which we'll go back to Jaya?
Thank you, Hari, for this opportunity. First of all, hello and a very good evening to everybody. Thanks to INHAF, Kirtibai, Hari and all your team and all the other members in this panel for creating this opportunity for all of us and the rest of us who are going to come and join this mission, I would say, the mission. I'll come back to your point. Initially, I just wanted to express that, you know, I'm an urban and regional planner. I've been working in the planning consulting sector for the last more than 2 decades, working closely with the governments, city governments, and especially in preparation of city scale planning, strategic planning for large cities. And coming to that scale, which you were talking about, is for metropolitan cities, which is 10 million and above. And the scale is humongous, it's huge. And the impacts, which you're already starting to talk about, are really, I would say, challenging. But a few more minutes, you know, I will not take much time in the introduction, is to introduce myself. I've already done that, and you know, we can talk about other things later. 2020 would have been an epoch year. Everybody was talking about Vision 2020. It would have been an epoch even without the pandemic. It would have been time for us, all of us, to relook and rethink what is going on in the way we are growing our cities, you know, urbanization, the type of urbanization, what impact it has on the rest of the areas which are not urban, what are the economic linkages, the social issues. And then the pandemic happened, you know, and all these 21st century goals and about improving life in cities, I think everything has got a serious jolt, and that creates an opportunity for us, as Jay was mentioning, during times of calamities, you know, new opportunities arise. We have to think differently. And that's where I feel that your title of Rethinking Cities is really apt. The timing is right. And technology is helping us connect and share our thoughts and ideas. So I would like to kind of repeat this title of It Pays to Own Your City. You know, Tan, Man and Dhan. We can do it with our Tan. Physically, we work in our cities, we work for cities. We can give our Man, we can give our thoughts, ideas, you know, and add to this intellectual knowledge. And Dhan, if we are talking about economics and wealth and money, of course, not to forget the society, because we are all a part of this fabric. So I would like to kind of talk more on the scale of the challenges we face, the macro level issues, the metropolitan issues, the governance challenges, you know, and the fact that the city does not exist in isolation. It has a deep link with its fringe. We call it the hinterland, and then the rural areas and the region, and there are influence zones, and there are economics. The economic theories are also based on these linkages. And then importantly, briefly about public participation, how we have to get all of this together, use this timing, and you know, actually, can we alter the direction or the course of the type of development which we want for all of us? So with that, I would like to give back the mic to you, And, I hope I've kind of covered.
Thanks, Maheep.
Yeah, thank you.
Epoch Year 2020, Jaya is also saying the city can't exist in isolation. We all have been saying. I go the other extreme and say the city is a parasite on the rest of the ecosystem. We are no more than 2% or 2.5% as landmass, and you know what happens with cities which devour everything. Over to you now, Jaya, for you to see that you take whatever you think you want to take as time, maybe 8, 9, 10 minutes to present what you want to. To all of you listeners, she's going to be sharing her screen, or the secretary is going to do that. Is that one of you out there, please? Share Jaya's screen, if you can do that. That's right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Over to you, Jaya. It's your floor, Jaya.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Sure.
Wonderful. All right.
Well, before you start, I must say that many are complaining about the audio. Those of you who did write in, I'd like you to see if you can reconfirm to us if the audio is improved. Thank you. Over to you, Jaya.
Thank you, Hari. All right, so I will start with this. The coronavirus is now here and we're dealing with this reality and we think it's huge and we can't wait for it to be over so that we can get on with our lives. But guess what? There's climate change and other troubles and possibly other pandemics around the corner. So in our imagination of what cities should look like, or what an ideal city should look like, we're talking about zero carbon cities. So we want to stay away from the impacts of climate change. We want to make sure that we're insulated, the 1.5 degree or the 2 degree climate change that we're headed towards. How can we kind of climate proof ourselves against that? And so we're talking about connected, compact, clean cities, right? But guess what the reality is, right? And Hari, you mentioned some of this in your talk and some stats about how urban sprawl, like we're adding this amount of square kilometers to Bangalore every year, right? So imagine that. In terms of pollution, we are losing 1.2 million lives annually because of the air pollution impacts. Health and productivity of workforce, when you look at how much is spent on just the IT sector, $3.5 billion, just stress being a key factor because of these lifestyle that employees have. So basically, when we look at what are the challenges for city regions as we're starting to reboot, I mean, one is how do you increase the economic value and improve the quality of life for all the citizens? How do you increase the region's visibility and help it to compete? And this is going to be key. I'll talk about this a little bit later. How do you maximize the potential of all your resources, whether it's human, urban, economic, institutional? How do you maximize their potential? And then how do you build resilience and strengthen environmental qualities which are in your community? And then most importantly, and I think Maheep will speak about this, is also how do you overcome fragmentation to better governance systems? But before that, we need to understand when we're talking about the city, who are the stakeholders? Who decides for the city? Who pays for the city? In India, we don't have a mayoral system. We just have the chief minister who's there for the state. We have MLAs, we have other political heads in the city. And then the question is, who decides for the city, who pays? So here's sort of a mapping that I kind of quickly put together about the city stakeholders. And when you look at it, you have 4 main groups. So you have the users, the citizens, visitors, civic groups, children. You have drivers, the manufacturing, technology, utility units. You have enablers, which are financial organizations, elected officials, your standards committees. And then you have the providers, the university, urban thinkers, tech companies who provide the manforce. And this is what they come with, what you see in the boxes is what they provide. Now, this is a very complex relationship because all of these users, all of these stakeholders are also consumers of the city, and they need to function together to provide the services well. So all of their services are dependent on all of them working together nicely and in a good rhythm. The other thing to note is that the decisions that these people collectively or individually make impact cities for 30 to 100 years. That's the kind of lock-in we are looking at when you're building a new building, a road, any kind of an infrastructure. That's the lock-in you create. So think about it. You're not just planning for your generation, you're planning for the next and probably the next. So that is where, the urban planner, thinker, catalyst kind of comes in, right? So what is the role of people like us, people like Maheep, me, Hari, others? So we are basically ensuring that the city's interests are negotiated well, so that not one of these stakeholders hijacks the city's interest. And so we are kind of doing this whole balancing act, which is very difficult. And for the most part, we are muddling through, to quote Lindblom. One of the other sobering facts to realize is that while we are looking at economic development in India, urbanization across the globe is not going to be accompanied by economic growth everywhere, especially in the poor countries. Some over here, the disparities will be such that the poor will become poorer, the rich might become richer, and that gap will just keep expanding. The second thing to note is that when you look at municipal budget per capita, Indian cities, the one in the red circles, they have some of the lowest municipal budget per capita, which means that the government does not have deep coffers to spend on their citizens. When you look at Bangalore, for example, and you look at the urban footprint, and when you look at the urbanization that has happened, we started from the Pete area, and here's how we've grown, between just 3 decades, and we're adding 1,000 square foot of built-up area per minute, right? And is this being managed and planned properly? Not really. A lot of the development which is happening in the suburbs is really poorly managed, is not planned, is not serviced, and a lot of it is dependent on self-provisioning, which means that the governance systems, because of them not working, because of all these stakeholders not working together, what we are getting is a very disparate sort of a city. This is exacerbated by the fact that when you look at jurisdictions, the Bangalore city provider jurisdictions are very different. So the water does not coincide with the bus or the electricity provider, and there again you have a situation. When you look at it from a stakeholder standpoint of how do I engage with the city, this is just to give you an idea of the multiplicity of institutions, and this is just the transport sector. So where do you go in? Where do you engage? Who do you start with is a big question. Now, again, looking at Bangalore and competitiveness, I said I'll talk about this a bit. And it's very important because while on the left, you see a map which tells you about the intensity and diversity of firms that are coming to Bangalore. This also represents the amount of investment which it is getting. So the more red means the more investment is happening here. Bangalore is doing really well, but when you look at it from the competitiveness standpoint, in terms of the productivity with which its natural, human, all of its capital is being used, Bangalore is not doing too well. And it can't. What if you're stuck in traffic jams for 2 hours just getting to work? You can't be competitive. And your workforce and your labor force is going to get sick and tired of the city and move away to other places. And that is something that we need to take cognizance of. So basically the question is, how do you make the city work for its people? And there are cities that we can learn from, which have transformed. There's Medellin in Colombia, there is Surat in India after the plague. And I won't go into the details of what they did, but there were some transformative actions that the leadership took, which helped these cities completely recover from what they were going through. On the one hand, it was crime. On the other hand, it was disease. And they really did manage to turn that around. In Bangalore, meantime, we have workers losing 8 days per year just sitting in traffic, right? And a majority reason for that is if you look at this map, you look at the major job locations, the Manyata Tech Park, Electronic City, Whitefield, HSR, and you look at the metro grid, right, which is the red bubbles around the yellow line. That's phase 1. So that doesn't connect to these job centers, right? So which means only 7% of the city's jobs are within a 500-meter distance of the metro station, which means people are on the roads. They're not making use of the mass transit system. And so their lives are miserable, and the city is not kind of, leveraging its infrastructure to the best and the maximum potential. Same thing with land values. We talk about how congested Bangalore is, but when you look at a FER or a floor area ratio mapping, you realize that a lot of the built up within Bangalore city, within the core, where the density of the infrastructure exists, has not been utilized yet. So what this means is that while from a metro infrastructure, we are trying to derive value through land value capture by increasing taxes and by levying different kinds of, sources of fee and all of those, we are not being able to do that very successfully because the intensity of development where the capacity exists does not match up. And so what we need to realize is it's also about value creation, because what the citizens care about is value creation, not about the land value. Now, how we build cities matter clearly, and this is an example between Atlanta and Barcelona. And when you look at it, the population is kind of similar, but when you look at the transport carbon emissions alone, just given the form of the city, it's a huge, difference in terms of what they emit. I'm going to talk about housing a little bit before I close out. And this is because, we were discussing this earlier. And, we're also trying to figure out what sort of led to the mass exodus of the informal sector, in all of the cities in India during the last couple of months. So just to kind of touch upon housing, right now we are looking at the growth of underserviced substandard housing, which is disconnected from livelihoods for the most part. And the policy emphasis also is on home ownership for the most part until very recently, like a couple of days ago, and that has changed. But we'll see how that pans out. And then land policies and regulations are looking to push the poor out of the city. And so these are the numbers, there's a scarcity of accessible land, rising land and construction costs, and there are poor, public-private partnerships. And the current solution is basically relocation. You take a slum, you take a low, end area, degraded area, you take the people, you move them out, you build something fancy over there. But that has its own problems because then you're disconnecting people from the social infrastructure networks and employment opportunities, which then leads to proliferation of more slums because that's not where people want to be. And those areas are not necessarily connected with good public transport. So essentially what can be done? I mean, there are a couple of things, and this is coming out of research that WRI has done on, housing across the globe, in terms of defining equitable access. So a couple of things. One is, in situ participatory informal settlement upgrading, various ways to do that, rental housing markets, looking at that versus just ownership, and then underutilized urban land parcels and how do you convert that into affordable housing. Now, housing, you have to remember, is not something that the private sector will necessarily provide because there's not a profit to be made. So the government has to come up with interesting ways, incentives, other, schemes, which is going to ensure that that exists. There are some policy levers that we currently have in the form of the National TOD policy, which talks about increasing the land under development, therefore normalizing land prices and leading to efficient housing. Housing has also been provided infrastructure status, which gives it some kind of discounts in terms of taxation. And then there's the recently introduced affordable rental housing scheme, which has been put forth, taking into cognizance what happened with the whole migratory labor issue and all of that. Now, just to spend a minute on that, informal sector, the people who kind of left the city, right, in the last couple of months or were forced to leave the city, is messy essentially. No one wants to talk about it. No one wants to understand it. And there is nothing that's taught about it. In fact, we don't even know the correct numbers. We estimate it to be about 20 million, the urban migrants. And that's not including people like myself, but that's talking about, the people who are lower income. But some statistics, from some research institutes peg that number at 72 million. Now that's huge because these people are contributing about 50% of the GDP and they form about 90% of the labor pool of the country, and that includes agriculture. But there is no attention paid to them in any way. A lot of the exodus happened not because people wanted to go home because they felt secure there, but because they did not have any housing security. There are no formal rent agreements when you look at how these slums operate or the lower income housing settlements in urban villages operate. There are no formal rent agreements. These people don't have any kind of proof of residence. And so the landlords are free to treat them any which way they like. And that is basically, where we are at and the kind of insecurity that the majority of the labor pool suffers from. So in terms of way forward, a theory of change. This is what, I've been thinking of. The three things that are going to matter as we go forward in terms of rebuilding for resilience, rebuilding our cities. One is economic growth. So how do you create jobs? How do you retain jobs is going to be essentially critical. And for that, you will need to create livable cities. How do you skill for the future? Have you thought about what are the kind of jobs that exist today? What are the kind of jobs that will exist in the future? And how do we match that up? Are there education institutions doing that? Do they have those kind of courses? Do they have contemporary courses to match that? And the third is securing the informal economy workers, like I just mentioned. The second point is the environment. More and more, because of the economic growth, we've seen in some cities across the world that they have relaxed their environmental regulations, which is going to ultimately be to the detriment of the city and its economic growth. So how do we not get into that trap? One is invest in nature-based solutions to improve your natural capital. Simply said, nature-based solutions are the non-traditional, non-engineering gray solutions. And we're talking about moving from gray to blue-green solutions using nature and harnessing its own power to improve, the environment in a city. The second is improving efficiency of resource use. And for that, we'll have to introspect about our consumption patterns, what we are doing as a community, what we are doing as a society, and how do we kind of ensure that there is efficiency in terms of the various resources that we're using. The third is circular systems. And this talks about, again, waste, water, energy in those realms. How do you kind of not become completely dependent on grids? How do you not completely become dependent on non-renewable resources? And how do you kind of recover some of those? Again, that will require a lot of behavior changes, a lot of introspection about how we currently operate. Finally, health, and that is going to be underlined now, the public health, and how we're going to go around that with our urban planning efforts. One is clearly investing in public health infrastructure. This is something that a state like Kerala had a wide lead on, and so they did really well when it came to addressing the COVID situation. Then there is the clean air, water, energy, building systems. How do you not only create the enabling policies, but also the incentives so that these things can happen in cities, which tend to be the petri dishes of dirty air, dirty water, energy systems not working, and so on. And finally, how do you reimagine the urban form and the built environment? The whole notion of the compact, connected, coordinated growth. How do you bring that back? And all of this is going to require citizen engagement. And the citizen engagement is required to ensure that this is accessible to everybody, that your cities are, they're livable for all groups of people, age groups, income levels, they're equitable. And this leads to the resilience of cities. And when it comes to owning your city, a last point about this, I think as far as citizens are concerned, the main thing is that you need to have information, because information is power. Then you need to figure out your modes of engagement. And third, you need to be holding everyone and everything accountable. And that is how you get to owning your city. And why that's important is because what you don't own, you don't take care of. And so that's a simple reason of why you should own your city and why it pays to own your city. And I think one place where you can start with is neighborhoods. This is for the, for you, me, for everyone. Where do we start with owning our city? Your neighborhoods that meet people's needs and ensuring that there are basic services, people feel safe, they feel healthy, they can socialize, work, and flourish. So this is just about, the influence strategy. So what are the tools that planners can use, that we can use to make this happen? One is clearly evidence-based research and planning. Like, you have to bring the science to the talk, otherwise nobody believes you. Second is tools and platforms for engagement, co-creation of solutions, new ideas, startups, and other MSMEs are bringing in. Pilots and demonstrations of proof of concepts. Nothing works like a demonstration. We have seen that in our city with, Church Street and other places where Tendershore took off. Coalitions and convening for collective action and outreach. You have to build, these platforms where stakeholders can get together, and then influencing the influencers and other change agents that exist in your city, and also how do you capacitate them. So essentially, the last thing I'll say is that when you're starting or restarting the city's engines, when you look around at all of these cities which have come out of depression, whether it's Seoul, Singapore, Austin, Texas, anywhere across the world, the one thing or the two things that they had in common was one, strong leadership. And that leadership basically said, okay, we need a strategic plan for the city to get back on its feet. And the second thing that they did was find ways to retain and attract jobs and create livable neighborhoods. So you go to any of these cities and what strikes you is how livable, how comfortable, how walkable they are. Yes, that was deliberate. And that was part of the reason that these cities have recovered so well and are resilient. So I just want to leave you with one thought that, you have to consider that we are doing this not just for ourselves. And why it pays to be involved in your city is because your children, our children, are going to be inheriting the city. And we need to make sure that the places that they inhabit are not an embarrassment for us, or they are not, a legacy that we leave behind, which they have to worry about. Because honestly, eco-anxiety is a word, it's a reality. There are children, there are people who suffer from it right now, and it's actually very alarming. So what can we do to make the situation better? And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Jaya, for that wonderful, whatever tour that you offered us. What you own, you don't care for. Well, Srikanth is going to give you the other side of it all in terms of what the government is not doing. He talked of incompetence and ineptitude when he spoke in the beginning. Well, he has strong views, I know this, of Srikanth. But before I invite Srikanth, I must acknowledge the presence of Professor K.T. Ravindran, who does not know K.T. Ravindran. He's going to be a speaker, another panel on June 17, which is the following Wednesday, which is webinar 2 on the Rethinking Cities series. We have Sriram Kuchimanchi, another wonderful guy who is among probably the maybe 4 or 5 people in the country today who do carbon mapping. We have Vikas Brahmar, very, very young guy who is also incubated by Jaya's group, WRI. And he's been working on how fresh water can't be used just once. Imagine if all water in your apartment could be beyond the tertiary treatment that your STPs offer, turned to drinking water like Singapore has done and 60% of urban China has done, you'll have solved more than 70% of your challenge on water, Srikanth. Benedict Paramanand, editor of Sustainability Next, is also here with us. Ajay Naik, an old friend from Bombay, is here with us. All those friends out there from the Makerere University and the University of Tanzania in Dodoma, greetings to you all. Thank you for making time. And trust me, not just this one webinar, every single one of them from here on, the next 30, let's assume, are going to be lessons that Africa can borrow from. You are about 10 times the landmass of India. You are at 30 million square kilometers. We are at 3.3 million square kilometers. And our population and Africa's population is just the same. You are at 1.2 billion. As a matter of fact, you are about 100 million less than us. But in the next 10 years, that explosive growth on population that you're going to be seeing is not something that is good for you. As I told you all, as we all shared when we met at Kampala, the important thing for you to realize is that you're at the cusp of change and you can stop things from happening, things from careening as they have done in India. I will also acknowledge the distinguished presence of Romy Khouchla, that architect from Delhi, and Vasant Kini, a CEO, who has been very, very diligently coming in for every one of these thought seminars and sessions that I've been holding, let's say. And I know that this is a person who could also influence, like many people in the corporate sector. India Incorporated has to do as much as government and as citizens. And that is what I think Srikanth is going to be speaking to us about. Your turn, Srikanth, to take over. And it's about how you got the courage to be a politician. You know how odious this can be, a politician and such. As a matter of fact, when you first came and spoke to me about it, you saw that look of apprehension or of misgiving on my face. But then as we stepped out of that office, I said to myself, here is a man who is wanting to do public purpose. Now, how can I not say yes to somebody like that? Not that I've done very much to help BNP or you or all those wonderful champions who are today present in this group, in this audience. I cannot but, salute you for what you do. And we will see what we will do as foot soldiers to help you along, Srikanth. Over to you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Hari. Thanks for those kind words. Indeed, it's a different journey. It's a tough journey, but then we are doing it as a big group of citizens across Bengaluru. That's what gives us hope that we can bring about that change. So one thing that I took off as a very key takeaway from Jaya's presentation is the importance of livable neighborhoods. The solutions to the city's problems lie not in centralization. The solutions lie in decentralization. The more we are able to push a work to be done, broken down at the ward level, at the area level, at the locality level, at the RWA level, at the house level, I think we are creating those building blocks for finding solutions for the city's issues. So that's one very fundamental thing that I just sort of have to completely agree with what Jaya said there. And in this endeavor that we have embarked on, we are pretty much trying to push for that. Ultimately, if the 198 wards of Bengaluru can work as self-contained, let's say, cities or townships that can be self-sustaining, that can create livable neighborhoods, walkable footpaths, safe environment, etc. I think we pretty much find the solutions there. So I do have a presentation to make. Will Radhika be sharing that, or should I be sharing that on?
No. Who is this now up there? Is that someone who will share the screen? He's waiting.
Or I think I can share my screen as well.
Yeah, you could do that, Srikanth, if you have it with you. And your bandwidth seems to be a little low because your voice is sort of trailing off once in a while. Great. There's your screen. Thank you.
Okay. You're all able to see the screen?
Yes, yes.
Great.
Go ahead, please.
I'll dive straight into the topic. When we're rethinking our city, what we have to understand is currently the situation is fairly critical. I would say Bengaluru, a city like Bengaluru, I don't know about other cities, we are definitely here on life support. We're dependent on too many external systems to survive and sustain. And let's see what those means. So if you look at the very fundamental issues facing our city, and if you look at the government's response, I've just put the government's response in red there. And I think red is a very, very apt color to describe how things are taking shape. But when we look at water scarcity or the huge shortage of water that the city is facing, the government's response is tapping into more and more rivers and water bodies from outside the city. When we talk of horrible traffic jams, the high commute time that Jaya talked about, and when we talk of mobility as an issue, the response to that is, let's build more roads, more flyovers. When you have this big garbage issue with large landfills and garbage black spots across the city, what is the response of the government? Let's find more landfills to fill it with. When the city is facing frequent power outages, shortage of power, what's the response? Let's buy more energy from other states which are in surplus. Now, these kind of responses are not just knee-jerk. These kind of responses are not just reactive in nature. They are not even solutions to these problems. In fact, these are actually responses that exacerbate the problem further. They just make the problem bigger and bigger and make it even more unmanageable for the future. And Jaya again alluded to the point. We have to think about what we are leaving behind for the next generation. In essence, what we are doing now is the problems that we are facing, we are making them bigger and passing them on to the next generation. And I don't know when this whole system is going to come collapsing. It could probably happen in the not too distant future. And for example, if we were to take a very live example of the fundamental issue that has been in the news for a long time now, day zero. There are certain cities which are going to run out of water. Cape Town was one, and Bengaluru is being touted as the first Indian city that's going to probably run out of water. Now, whether this is a doomsday scenario that's being exaggerated or whether it's a reality, to me, it doesn't matter. The reality is we are on the brink of a disaster. And the government itself has admitted that by the year 2031, the city is going to be in deep shit. The availability of water per person per day, as per this news report, is going to be about 88 liters. And that's as dire as it gets. I'm going to talk about how the government and citizens can actually collaborate and work together to actually find solutions to these problems. And that's really where the difference and the impact can happen, not in anything else. Let's look at, I'm going to cover the water situation. And any problem that we take, whether it's mobility or energy or waste or anything else that you take, I think the approach has to be very similar. First up, we have to understand what the source of the problem is. On the demand side, if you were to look at it, it's a global norm. 135 liters per capita per day is the consumption norm. And if you look at the population of Bengaluru, give or take 1 or 2 crores here and there, 1 or 2 lakhs here and there, we have a population of about 1.2 crores, 12 million. If you were to do a simple math of 12 million into 135 liters, the total requirement is about 1,600 million liters per day or 160 crore liters per day. That's what we need. The number actually looks very high. But against that, if you actually look at what the availability of water in Bengaluru is, there are three sources, and only 3 sources. We don't have anything more. There's Kaveri water, which the government has laid pipelines across the city, which delivers about 1,450 million liters per day. Obviously, the supply will be a little bit more during some seasons, will be less, but on average, it's 1,450 million liters. The rainwater that Bengaluru gets annually, and if you break that down, and on an average, on a daily basis, it's 3,000 million liters per day. I think we all need to have that number in mind. It's 3,000 million liters per day of rainwater that we get. Not all of it can be recharged, used to recharge the ground. Not all of that can be reused. But even if we were to use just 1/3 of that, we get another 1,000 million liters per day. And if we were to look at the capacity of treated water that we have available in this city, there are BWSSB owned sewage treatment plants. There are private sewage treatment plants, either in commercial complexes, corporates, or apartment complexes. We have broadly 2,000 million liters, but let's take for the moment it's only 1,500 million liters per day. Against a requirement of 1,600 million liters per day, the availability is actually 4,000 million liters per day, even if we were to be conservative on the rainwater front. I want people to look at this slide, digest this. We keep talking of water scarcity. We keep talking of day zero. The reality is the availability is 2.5x the consumption. 4,000 million liters against 1,600 million liters per day. What really is the problem? And there are two sides to the coin. So we can either say that the government is going wrong on water management, or we can say that the citizens are consuming more than they should be. And like in everything else, the truth probably lies somewhere in between. We believe that citizens have been consuming water pretty indiscriminately and without even realizing that. And that's the sad part. It's not like we're deliberately doing it. We don't realize that we are part of the problem. And there are certain studies that we have done, and based on some water meter installations in some apartments, we realized that many households consume actually more than 400 liters per person per day. I'm not talking 400 liters per house per day. I'm talking 400 liters per person per day. But our guesstimate, and I think this is a very reasonable guesstimate based on whatever limited data that we have seen, the city on an average, we are the 1.2 crore people that are living in Bengaluru. On an average, we are consuming about 300 to 400 liters per person per day, against a globally laid down norm of 135 liters per day, which means we have to get our act together as citizens as well. And coupled with that, the government has miserably failed in understanding that the city has actually more water than it needs. And instead of focusing on measures to enable reduction of water consumption, reuse wastewater, recharge groundwater, those are the 3 R's that we keep talking of: reduction of consumption, reuse of wastewater, and recharging groundwater. The government actually has been talking of a grand project of bringing water from a place called Linganamaki. And that's the short-sightedness that we have to deal with. Why do we have to go to a Linganamaki? My belief is we should not even be accessing Kaveri water. We don't need Kaveri water. Kaveri water does not belong to Bengaluru. It belongs to the farmers. It belongs to the people living in the Kaveri Delta region. Bengaluru does not need Kaveri water. That's the aim that we need to be having. That's the vision with which we need to be working towards. Instead, here we are in a strange situation where we are trying to bring water from other sources and going to deprive other people who are dependent on that. We are on the brink of a war not between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. We are on the brink of another war that's going to happen between, let's say, Bengaluru versus rest of Karnataka. And gradually it's going to exacerbate further and further. We've got to stop this nonsense somewhere, somehow. And here is how we can do it. What can the government do? Very simple and sensible measures that can be taken up. We are still living in an old world water billing model. It's a very simple system that we need to encourage. We have to incentivize low usage. We have to penalize high usage. Now, how simple is that? The government still hasn't done that. I don't know why. We have even put out very simple metrics for the government to take up, right? Kaveri water billing. You could start at ₹5. We are starting at something like 8 or 9 rupees. We can actually reduce the lowest slab. But then the slabs need to keep going up exponentially as people move on at higher levels of consumption. And these are very simple solutions that can be implemented by the government. And mind you, here I'm not talking of the government inefficiency or ineptitude. We are not talking of the sewage treatment plants needing to be set right. We are not talking of the lakes to be rejuvenated. We are not talking of the stormwater drains to be cleaned. These are very simple solutions that can be implemented sitting from where you are. You can mandate online registration and metering of every source of water at the individual household level or the community level, including borewells. Today, borewells are not registered, are not metered. Mandate them. It's as simple as that, right? And of course, execution, you have to decentralize and make sure that at local ward levels they're being implemented. Create a system of filing water returns. Every household needs to file water returns. How much of water am I consuming in my household every month, and which source am I using? Am I using borewell? Am I using rainwater? Am I using sewage treatment plants? Am I using Kaveri water? We need to get accountability to go in at the individual household level. That's extremely important. And the government can push for these kind of reforms, which are fairly simple to do. In fact, as a group, as a federation, as a group of citizens, we have suggested this to the Pollution Control Board, to the Water Supply and Sewerage Board, etc. It just doesn't happen. We can't understand why, because these are simple to at least pass as a rule. There's not even a thought process going along those lines. And from a citizen's perspective, what are the simple and sensible things that we can do? And in fact, we would say it's the responsibility of the government to run campaigns about the looming water crisis. Educate citizens. Tell them how can consumption come down from the 300 to 400 liters per person per day to 135 liters. Reduce consumption through fitting tap aerators in existing taps. Place objects inside toilet flushes. Washing of cars can be done in a waterless manner. There are newer and newer systems that are evolving. Washing machines should be mandated only with full load. How do we encourage taking bath with bucket and half bucket? We ran a very interesting and unique challenge called as a half bucket challenge to the citizens. We challenge citizens to take a bath with half a bucket of water. If you're going to reduce from 20 liters to 10 liters, which is eminently possible, 10 liters into 1.2 crore people is 12 crore, 120 million liters. That's about 5% of the current usage that we are talking of, probably more, 7-8% that we are talking of. How do we reuse wastewater through, washing machine? There are people who use the washing machine wastewater to tie up to the flushes. How do we reuse the RO wastewater? How do you reuse the STP wastewater? How do we recharge groundwater through rainwater harvesting systems, recharge wells, groundwater systems? These are all systems that are functional in many places. The government just has to promote awareness around this and encourage citizens, incentivize citizens, at some level, force citizens and penalize citizens if they're not doing it to get things done. Over a period of time, if you are able to get this done, things will start moving. In a sense, whether it is, and similar approach can be taken not just for water consumption, waste management, a similar approach. You first take the issue at the macro level, understand the real problem, look at the numbers, break it down at the local level, whether it's at the household level or at the community level, find solutions. So the government-citizen collaboration is the key. Atmanirbharta is a new term that's gotten introduced in our lexicon recently. I think we have to look at Atmanirbharta. Self-sustenance, water, energy, waste, mobility, right? So the government has to understand the problem correctly in the first place, then formulate sensible policies and rules, create proper incentives and penalization mechanisms, run structured education awareness programs, and decentralization is the key. Solutions are simple, execution indeed is challenging, and the best way to execute is decentralize. Give power to the wards, give power to RWAs, give power to the localities to implement, to execute. And citizens have their role, communities have their role, resident welfare associations have their role to play as well. They need to understand what they need to do at their individual and community level to address the problem. Let's make sure that we all follow and enforce the rules with one another. And I've now come to the conclusion that sustainability is not a jargon, it's actually commercially beneficial. Implementing water conservation systems, while they cost money, from an ROI perspective, they pay off brilliantly well. We need to understand that. Let's also develop knowledge about simple local solutions, whether it's RWH or whether it's STP systems, whether it's aerators, water meters, and collaboration at the locality and the RWA level are all the ways by which we can find solutions along with the government. So to me, the solutions lie in this collaboration, the solutions lie in this decentralization, the solutions lie in working together. If we the citizens and like what I've done along with the team that we're all doing it together, get into governance, government has to engage with citizens. Government cannot work in isolation. It takes two hands to clap, and these two hands can clap to bring about great impact to the city. whether it's mobility, whether it's waste, whether it's energy, whether it's water, whether it's infrastructure, all of these things can be addressed. That's really what I wanted to share, Hari, through a very live example of, let's say, water conservation as a, let's say, a case study. That's really what I wanted to put forth to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Srikanth. Well, there are people who are disagreeing with you. We have Niranjan Khatri here who says, I'm going to talk to you, Srikanth, offline. I will develop a menu for ensuring that we ask that Kennedy question, ask not what the, the government can do and stuff. The other is, when you say educate citizens, there is this other doyen of energy, Padhu Padmanabhan, who is present in this group today. From 1973, about the time of the OPEC crisis, the man has been working in the energy sector and has done some enormous innovations, and he proved only one thing between work that he did at the USAID, before that in the National Productivity Council in India, and then after that at the World Bank in the late 90s, and then into something else that he did at the South Asia level. And effectively what he says is, and I think there are enough case studies to prove that, maybe Jaya wants to endorse that, it has to be market-led. All those things that you talked about, the spectrum of solutions that we can offer for water consumers can turn, I believe, like Prahlad said, into an opportunity. A deficit there is not something that we should seek the government to plug. The government will be disastrous if you ask them to do anything. Educate is something that is beyond the ken of government planners, is one of the views. There are other people. There is G.K. Bhatt, a wonderful guy from Ahmedabad. Again, I know him for 40 years. He runs this, he's been in the development sector for many, many years now. He says it's expensive to be poor. And in a sense, you said that, Srikanth, and that was nice to hear you say that. Well, decentralize. 1970, that man says it, called Alvin Toffler. He died only 2 years ago, I think. Over to you, Maheep. Maybe about 10 minutes. We are at 5:40. We have plenty of time, like we all discussed this morning. And to you all listeners, we are sort of taking the liberty of extending this beyond the time that we committed on the invitation that we sent to you all. We'd like to think that you also are enjoying this as much as these people are who are presenting these things. We will get to the Q&A hour very, very quickly. Lots of questions, lots of insights that others have thrown up, and we have to discuss that here too. Maheep, over to you.
Thank you, Hari, and the other panelists. I think I'd like to start off right away from what Hari, you mentioned about cities with 10 million plus population. So look at the scale of the people. Yeah,
if you can share your screen and get on with it. Yeah. I mean, as you talk, that'll be nice. Instead of depending upon the banking on the others, that's only a backup.
Yeah, I'll do it right away.
Yeah.
So,
but Srikanth is right. A whole lot of things that both of us can do, the government and the users. Muralidhar Rao is here, another very articulate citizen out here in Bangalore, who's initiated many thought streams over the last 10, 12 years. Nice to have people like him. He talks about how the implementation of 74th Amendment very seriously is part of the job that we all need to be taking up. I'm sure BNP in its ways is also seeking to do such things, but we listen to you now, Maheep.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to start off actually. Decentralization, the 74th Amendment, incidentally, it's a matter of a few years, and I've already written about this. We are going to actually commemorate, I would say, maybe 3 decades of the process since this process started. 1990s, early 90s, and by mid 90s the amendments came into being. But to be specific, about 10 million plus population, and Srikanth has said it, you said it, Jaya said it. Just multiply 135, even if it's not 400, it's 135 crore of liters of water every day. You want to put 500 grams per capita generation of waste? Indian cities, are we growing into more advanced societies where we generate more garbage, or we are going to reduce in the future? So, and this is also a kind of a hint to Srikanth that what will happen to the future of the cities when these sizes grow, and then it's a continuous problem. So the scale is immense. It's thousands of million liters of water, or crores of liters of water per day that goes into the system. And then for basic public health and human needs, we need to do that, fight water supply, and still many cities don't have that. And if we do that, then if water comes in, water goes out. So that's about 80 to 90% of that water in goes out as sewage. Then we need systems to manage that. And then thousands of metric tons of garbage generated every day. How many vehicles do we need? How many human resource, units do we need? So this is the challenge, I would like to cover it, but and going back to at the macro level. And of course, the first slide, everybody knows about it. I hope you can see the slide, Hari and others. If you can tell me, Hari. So, this is not my slide. Just picked up from the net, and we'll spend a few seconds. It's not the land mass which is under urban kind of use. We can say only 2%, but that's what you all have covered. It's about the economic engines these cities are, the jobs which we are talking about. Why are people coming into cities? What do they get here? Why are they leaving their homes and coming and living here? Is it a good habitable condition they are getting in the cities? Is it worth it? Is it money which pulls into these people into the cities? Okay, that's one part of the thing. Economy and social issues, I would say we would like to kind of club it together. Then the energy consumption and subjects close to your heart, Hari, and so many other people from the field of energy efficiency or civic service efficiency, about energy consumption, greenhouse emission, garbage, or sewage waste generated. So, I'll not go into details, and I don't have many slides, maybe just 4 more slides, is to kind of remind everybody, all of us, including me as a practicing planner, about the scale of the problem we face. And this impacts all other aspects, whether it's physical infrastructure or social. The key factor for large projects or even city planning in the future, I think in the last decade, with some change in law has been land assembly, and land being a key factor in urban areas. And then there are so many economic, environmental, and social issues linked to land. I think these are big challenge. I'm not saying that I'm able to cover all of them in one slide or a few slides or a few minutes, but as you will notice in a few more minutes, I'll tell you that we are only igniting this discussion in a positive way. But we are very clear about the stark challenges, the stark nature of the challenges we are all facing. Talking about market, it's an important point you made, Hari, that who's going to do it? Although I put at number 4 or 5, private sector versus government sector. Who's going to do and manage these cities, the big cities, the behemoths, the big, gargantuan? We have words to describe the scale. Megalopolis, metropolis, super metropolis. So the market forces would require viability, and then the situations change, the social, political, environmental, economic situations change. The key to what we have seen recently during this pandemic time is what kind of work we do, what are the sectors of the economy, is it related directly to mobility, what section of this economy can work offline, online, on-site, off-site, and what are essential services. So I think the location of the work and the type of work also matter. So I added that point, in fact, just a few hours back. But what I'm saying is that these situations change, and it's difficult to predict. I'm glad you mentioned Alvin Toffler, because somewhere he mentioned also not just the change, it's the rate of change which we need to kind of tackle, and it's not easy. A big challenge in the big cities and small cities too, in fact. I'm not saying that we need to talk only of big cities. I'm just highlighting the fact that the social and physical infrastructure challenges are immense. It's not just the quantum, but the quality of that infrastructure. Whether it's a park or just a lunch space or a school, the quality of the built environment, the open space built relationship, what kind of quality it provides to the users. I'm coming to a very direct question, or a point here is about private sector versus government sector. What kind of models will we have for managing or developing first or managing these things? So is it PPP or PPPP or some other new forms that we have been trying so many, but it has to be a kind of a partnership. And it cannot be only a partnership between the private sector defined in the form of companies, conglomerates, or enterprises. There is a PPPP, which I'll close my slide with, that is the people factor, the human beings. I think jurisdiction and management, Jaya has covered in the slides. It's not an easy thing at all. There's the kind of management systems we have, the governance systems, jurisdiction of authorities, the geographical implication or the impact of these jurisdictions, and the overlaps or the intersections or unions and gaps. I think that's the point I would like to highlight. Legal issues, old procedures, old acts, old rules, times are changing, society is changing. Are we changing rapidly enough? Are we adapting fast? Are our regulatory mechanisms flexible? Are they people oriented? Do we go on a kind of swing mode that the telecom, I'm just going off in a little tangent for a few minutes. The telecom was restricted, then it became open, then we have authority to regulate it, then there are some kind of a control mechanism. So it swings from high control, open for all, then strict, I would say, action on various activities, and then we kind of ask questions. So I think civic services, role of private sector, all this has to go into some kind of a new and kind of regulatory and legal frameworks, which we need to rethink and rebuild. That's a part of the rethinking I'm trying to suggest. And a very critical factor which has emerged, I think probably more so in the last decade and a half, is the public participation as part of the stakeholders. So it's not just the stakeholders of a city or people who pay taxes. And you know very well that the city municipal boundary ends, and then the non-municipal boundary is a rural local body. And then they also pay taxes, but they are part of the fringe. We don't know where the city ends. It's just a boundary on the paper, or is it a real boundary? So this is important, that who are the stakeholders? We have to give more thought. I'm sure there are enough experts, and there are subject experts who can kind of structure this into a kind of more framed manner, in a framed manner. So I have a few questions for myself and of course for everybody. I've been talking about this for a few years now, but probably in the time of pandemic, we can rethink about these questions too. So what kind of future do we want for ourselves in our cities? What kind of cities do we want for us? What kind of future cities do we want for us? Now, can city planning be done in disconnect? I started off with this point. Can it be done in disconnect with the fringe and the rural hinterland or the hinterland, or the area in transition between the city and the hinterland? If you look at the Transact, we know what we are talking about. It's a very dynamic system which we're working with. And there are theories of cities as an organic form. But then if you overlap and overlay with the jurisdictional issues, the governance issues, the civic services issues, there are serious issues, and some of which are really, in a way, literally underground. The infrastructure which is underground, we don't see. But their public health is directly dependent on these basic infrastructure: water supply, sewage, stormwater drain, solid waste, power, and the infrastructure to support mobility, roads, and etc. So are we going towards, for big cities and primate cities? Every city has one big city. We know they are primate cities, they have capitals, centers of power. Are they going to continuously grow and grow and grow to super metropolises, or there will be super regions? Or can we do this balancing, as earlier speakers have mentioned, the balance, Jaya too mentioned that, of a decentralized urban pattern? It's not going to be easy. Our political system, our planning thought, our economics, our investments, our financial systems have to be reworked. And no doubt that the 73rd and 74th Amendment did raise these points, but we need to be practical and see how they're going to work. So I kind of have a concluding question on that: is what is the metropolitan planning approach and framework for the scale of metropolises? What are we going to have the approach? And how are we going to manage the cities, the big cities, with manpower, technology, I would say human resource, technology? It's going to keep on increasing the challenge. And importantly, that human beings and public safety should be an integral part of whatever we plan, with or without technology. So it has become clear in this pandemic time. I think we need to talk more about that. How do we keep the people central to this, whether it's of a particular economic section, whatever it may be, the vulnerabilities, So we talked about, Jaya mentioned smart cities, green cities, when I know you're talking about this in the green building movement, Hari, for so many decades now. I'm also part of that, is healthy cities. And now we have to think beyond technology and just smart cities. Smart city is a good thing if we can use it to a certain extent. Beyond that, what next? So healthy city movement in which cities are healthy and the citizens are healthy. And the new urban form, I raised this question. My ideas is, are we, kind of doing a balanced urban form which is inclusive and yet manageable when it comes to land ownership, migrants living temporarily, serving the city, then the city gets benefited from them. What do these people get back? The economically weaker sections, and then utility management, as Srikanth mentioned, to go for decentralized. Yes, a lot of discussion and positive kind of views on that. And then mobility, the use of public transport. I'm not putting full stop, if you notice. This discussion is going to continue. This is just the beginning. So making things happen is going to be important. We know that public transport is important. The share has to increase in all cities in India. So the quality of the transport also has to improve and increase. So the role of governance, in the governance, the role of the people, the resident welfare associations becomes all the more important, where we strengthen these partnerships and make this planning process more participative, but it has to be also efficient. It's not going to be easy to do this. But the emphasis has to be on participatory processes and consultative. So no full stops here. Now the execution of the projects, whether it's done through private enterprise, subsidiaries, government agencies, SPVs, at some point of time, these plans have to be translated into action on the ground, and there has to be an operational and maintenance aspect to all this. So where the planning and design to a large extent ends and it gets into a different mode. So, and all these have to be dovetailed with the revenue stream. So this is again another aspect which we need to do, think about more and work on this. Maybe a subgroups in your the INHAF, this mission will have subgroups to kind of get it all together. These are few thoughts which I had on financing, although I'm not a pure financing expert, but we do encounter these important kind of, we call them innovations, but actually they are tools, municipal bonds or whatever the market economics you were talking about, Hari. It has to be all integrated. Infrastructure finance, we call them town planning schemes or land pooling, value capture. So it's like, finally, I put the P for participatory on the top, although technology may be driving most of what we are doing right now. But in the background, it's governance and the governance structures with an intent to improve the living condition of people in the urban areas. So this is the PPP model. I'm not the originator of this idea. I have to give you credit to someone else who did that. But it's the public-private and the people partnership. It's not just a partnership between an agency and the government, but although on the basis of providing something to the people have to become partners. The big cities, especially the metropolises, cannot be managed efficiently without the active participation and efficient participation of people in a direct manner or through structured systems of RWAs. There has to be an integration at some level at the fourth, I would say, tier of governance. How we do that is probably a starting point for all of us. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and I'll hand over the mic to you, Hari. Thank you for this time.
Thanks, Maheep. Jaya, would you want to respond to both Srikanth's presentation and to Maheep's?
Sure. So I'll start with Srikanth's presentation and basically his thought process. And I think it's incredibly important that this kind of thinking is coming from apartment owners, people who are user of the basic services, because a lot of the growth in Bangalore, honestly, has happened in the periphery. And that's where we are continuing to expand. So thinking about alternative models, thinking about decentralization, thinking about efficiency, this really needs to be at the top of the mind of everyone. And I'll quickly share about, an initiative that we ran, the CityFix, and Hari, you were part of. The CityFix Labs, where we basically looked at, what kind of innovation is happening on waste, water, and energy. What are the gaps that exist in these value chains that the public sector will not fill, or is not equipped to fill, or resources to fill? And where is that the private sector is coming in with innovation? And so we ran this whole program of CityFix Labs, and we invited startups. We had about 125 startups apply to this in these various sectors. And then we started out with 10. Vikas here, and he was one of the 10 that was selected as part of the cohort. The discussion was that, your technologies are great, they are proven, they're not ideas in the air, but then what's preventing you from scaling this?
Yeah.
What we found is that this whole access to market, access to and access to government was the basic and the major hindrance for all of them. And on the part of the homeowners and residential complexes, we found, and we connected with BAF at that point as well, Srikanth, we found that just the awareness was lacking. They want to reduce their energy bills, they want to reduce their water bills, they want to not have to rely on tankers, but they don't know how to go about it, and who do they start with, where do they approach. But in engaging with government, two things. One is that there is a whole process of participating in government, where this whole procurement process comes in, the RFP and all of that, which becomes very difficult for these smaller enterprises to access for various reasons and the demands that they have. And we also see that there's a necessity for the government to participate in this, because in India, we have two very clear stories. One is about the LED, the success of going from your yellow bulbs to the LED bulbs, and how that transformation happens so quickly because the government participated in that innovation. On the other hand, we have the story of the RO, the Kent RO and the ROs of the world, where because there is no government participation and regulatory environment around that, there is a lot of unintended sort of consequences, negative consequences that the society is having to deal with in trying to access good quality water. So for every liter that you take, your 15 liters are wasted and so on and so forth. So the main point is that the government needs to participate, and that the awareness on the levels of the RWAs needs to be increased, and we need to be focusing on that.
I get that. Srikanth, your views on what Maheep said. Look at what she did intuitively. She's talking of 125 startups. I can tell you of EESL, that Super ESCO in India. They have set aside for this year, COVID or no COVID, they're looking at 1,800 crores that they want to give for retrofit solutions on energy efficiency projects. If I were to take an apartment of, say, 100 flats, 60, 70,000 liters, you do your STP, you're using 1/2 of the water. The other 30,000, if you put it through this system, like Singapore did, you can drink the water. Like you said, we don't need a Kaveri at all. Forget about new Kaveris. Now, if we did that, you know what happens? The investment, I can discuss that offline with any of you people as listeners who are here. You will find that the IRR is a phenomenal 32 to 35%. You get your money back in 3 years to 4 years. So why are we not thinking of how hygiene and safety is, of course, important. The water that we get from Kaveri after 6 towns, including Mysore city itself, when we take it from that source downstream of Mysore, is not water that you and I want to be drinking. And have we ever checked the source of tanker water that we buy in our apartments? And you will be terrified. You will not want to drink it. So I'm saying the solution lies in these market-driven processes, but I'd like you to sort of share your perspective, Srikanth.
With regard to RWAs and with regard to the role of citizens and communities, I think I've already communicated my viewpoint. Yes, Jaya, it was a great working along with an agency like WRI for a federation like Bangalore Apartments Federation. We realized that there's a lot of awareness that can be pushed through. There are a lot of new initiatives that can be taken up collectively, etc. So there are quite a few interesting initiatives that have happened, right? Individual house water meters, which have reduced consumption by more than 30%, mass implementation of water aerators, implementation of rooftop solar, which reduces the load on the grid and makes us, more environment friendly as well. So I think increasingly that's the way we have to move forward as well. So I don't think I have any different view on that.
We are all saying that in unison. Maheep, he is agreeing. All of us are thinking the same. It pays to own your city. And she said that, well, if you don't own something, you're not going to care too much for it. Let me take a lot of these phenomenal observations that have come from people here. I'll start with, one moment. I'm going to start with somebody like, okay, I mentioned it earlier. I'm going to now go back. And you see, I have a serious challenge here because people sent it on both on chat as well as Q&A. Okay, where do I start? There is somebody from Uganda, Peter Jaya. How do we ensure that our pedagogics are kept abreast, academics are kept abreast of these new approaches to city sustainability? How do we not only transform city planning processes and frameworks, but also the way we train urban development practitioners to be sensitive to these issues? Anyone who wants to take that? Researcher, Jaya, maybe. Should I read that again? It's there, out there on your Q&A.
So no, I got the gist of what they're asking, Hari. And two things. I mean, one, our curriculum, our curriculum for planners needs to be completely revamped and rethought. We are still teaching 1960s era planning, and it's not kind of contextual anymore. And the kind of challenges you face once you're out in the world, you're just completely not prepared for. So I think the curriculum needs to be completely revamped. The other thing that needs to happen is this whole capacity of cities. And that's the other thing that I want to bring up. That when you look at cities across the globe who have done really good work, have planned well, the Copenhagens, the Singapores and all of it, you look at the number of the proportion of planners to the number of citizens in those cities and in those countries. And you will realize that planners have a serious role to play. And the numbers in India, the numbers in Bangalore, the numbers of planners in BDA or in the government agencies, I can count on my fingers. For a city of an 11 million population, that just is not justified. So then, of course, putting your hands up in the air and saying, I can't do anything about it because you don't have the requisite capacity. And the capacity that you do have, they are not trained in the latest tools, engagement platforms, things that need to happen, access to just the new concepts that are coming up in various parts of the country and in the various parts of the globe that work. So I think they are just severely handicapped from not having, capacity and the wherewithal to deal with this large city because the decentralization has not happened. So I think two things, capacity and the revamping of the curriculum needs to be considered.
Maheep?
I think I fully agree. I fully agree with this, and I have a few additional kind of dimensions to add. Is there are always internal capacities. There are some things to do which are internal to a particular system, and there are external. So when I say this, it's not easy to define in a few minutes, but let me try to explain that this kind of capacity has to improve within government organizations. It has to improve within the professional bodies or individuals or the private sector, and also the society at large. Now, in the society at large, these government and private can still be defined through some dimensions or parameters or some ideas.
Make it briefer if you can, because we have lots more things to bring up.
I think on the society front, it is important to kind of structure, whether it's the RWAs or the Federation of RWAs, so that the engagement.
Sorry, the question was on how we bring academia to connect with industry and to bring the sort of education that Srikanth is talking about.
Yeah, I fully agree that the academia, the systems have to change and upgrade now. I would say that. Yeah.
Okay. One more question from somebody called G.K. Bhatt, Gopal Krishna Bhatt from Ahmedabad. Do we want a small number of large cities like Delhi and Mumbai and such? I think both of you mentioned that. Jaya did that and Maheep did also on metros and such. Or do we want cities spreading across the country? What should be the ideal size of a city in India? China, Russia and what it did even 20 years ago, they said if a city like Mysore, for instance, or even Kampala exceeds something like, let's say 500, 600,000 people, you move away from that city, you create another city. They did that long years ago. So what should be that sort of prescribed size for a city, and how do we de-urbanize? The other question, which is not part of this one, and I must say this to people who have asked this question, many of you have said this, how do we create opportunity in the hinterland in order that there is reverse migration happening, particularly post-COVID? I don't know if we can take up all issues in 90 minutes or 120 minutes, but I'll hand the mic over to Maheep this time.
I think it's very clear that the growth of a primate city is, I wouldn't say use the word impossible, but it's very difficult to reduce or kind of undo and kind of de-urbanize. These are strong forces which will go on forever. So we have to have a balanced approach, and it has to be at a national and state level. Coordination between state governments, it's a federal state subject, should be taken up at that level. So the urbanization has to be spread out. We have to have a strong focus on spreading out. So we are not going to reduce or slow down this growth of the big cities. No, we are not going to talk about that. We are going to try to balance out and spread out this growth. That's what I would do.
I got that. Srikanth, for you a question. Interesting one, again from the same guy, but how much autonomy should you think a city can offer in terms of water, energy, carbon, waste management, etc.? How much of demand can be met by internal management of these resources, and then we seek what we want to seek from elsewhere. Another question, I mean, sort of connected, is from somebody called Ashutosh. Like you had earlier, before the studio recording began, Srikanth, you had said, okay, I'm going to give you an example of water. But Ashutosh's question is, okay, you got 4,500 tons of waste per day in a city like Bangalore. We have 150,000 tons of waste, by the way, in this country. We have 270,000 tons in the US. So we can take consolation and say, hey, our waste generation is not as bad, quarter as bad as, let us say, the United States. If I take a city like Mysore or Kampala, you know, people like Ashok and it's coming from there. There's another Peter and many others are coming from the other place. I find the size is much the same. In Kampala, I find it's 450 tons. In Mysore, I find it to be about 500 tons if I remove the tourists from the equation. I'm saying energy. You're at 2.2 billion units a day in Bangalore today, and you know your figures in your cities. How do I save if the first fuel has to be energy efficiency? Anyone wants to speak about that? And that is part of owning a city. Srikanth. Have you lost him somewhere? Sorry, it's muted.
Hari, am I audible? My connection seems to be a little bit weak right now.
No, you're fine, absolutely. You could possibly keep the mic a little closer to you so that we can hear you louder. So
okay. I think the connection is suddenly becoming weaker.
Okay. But did you get the drift
so with regard to the point, I took an example of water, but I think it extends very much to
I got that.
Waste or energy or sewage. You know, the principle is the same. In terms of autonomy, I think we need to conceptualize and visualize cities which have mini townships and mini localities. Ultimately, all these issues that we are talking of can be solved if you're able to manage them at the local level. So somebody talked about 4,500 tons of waste in Bengaluru. Absolutely. There again, we would encourage people to think about how do we bring in systems that incentivizes reduced consumption. So it starts from there to saying then how do we recycle at the local level composting plants. I'm not a great fan of waste to energy plants which are centralized. We need proper segregation. We need proper local composting. Ideally, except for, let's say, some types of waste like construction and debris waste, and let's say possibly sanitary waste, everything else should be contained within the ward. So if you're able to conceptualize wards, I'll finish, Hari. Sure. If you're able to conceptualize wards as units of governance and provide autonomy to them, I think that's really where the solutions lie. That's where we have to, that's the direction that we have to start taking. So yes, autonomy and decentralization are very critical, whether it's waste or energy or water or wastewater.
Yeah. Two questions for you, Srikanth. I mean, two people have sort of asked you. One is Muralidhar Rao, the other is somebody else. The question to you is, the other person is Benedict Paramanand, who is an editor of Sustainability Next. Both of them want to know what you think of Arvind's programs in Delhi. Would you subscribe to that? If you are going to be, let's say, in some influencing sphere as a politician, will you want to be inspired by him, or will you want to take some other dimensions?
We are inspired by many people. Right? There are good things to take from multiple cities.
You're quickly learning as a politician.
So yes.
Yeah.
Spoken like a politician. But the reality is, there are lessons that we can learn from Delhi. There are lessons that we can learn from Surat, as Jaya initially pointed out in her presentation as well. There are lessons we can learn from Indore from a solid waste management perspective. So I believe that there are good pockets of excellence that exist across the country. Of course, not all of them are directly replicable or just copyable here in Bengaluru. We have to obviously adapt to the local needs. But by and large, in terms of, let's say, the water billing model that happens, I'm not a great fan of giving any freebies, but I am a great fan of incentivizing people for lower levels of consumption, and penalizing people for higher levels of consumption. That model is definitely the way to go forward. No freebies, so to say.
Yeah, there goes his
I don't want to get into a debate on, right? But again, from a solid waste management perspective, some of the models that Indore has implemented in terms of how we can get local wards to manage waste at their local levels. These are all less. We have people at our end who are studying those models. I don't think we should be just copying and pasting what is happening there. I think we have to take those best practices. There are best practices in Delhi that we are going to take. There are best practices in Indore that we will take, and from a few other cities that we've been hearing about as well, and evolve a unique model for Bengaluru, because all said and done, Bengaluru is very different from other cities because at the scale at which we are in and at the pace at which we are growing, I don't think there is any other city that exists which has an exact parallel.
Sure. Another man, sort of captures what you said. He says, bottom up needs to complement top-down grid-based systems. I think that's what you're saying in effect, Srikanth. Yes. Okay.
No, absolutely. That's why I said, see, when we said government citizens have to collaborate, what government does is top-down, what citizens do is bottom-up. If we are not able to build some kind of a connect between the two, I think it's all going to be completely disparate. And that's really where I said government programs and government schemes have to take into account ground level issues and work towards making sure that it's all decentralized. It's a classic case, right? I remember this one project where there was a track which was being laid by people. One set of people laid one side of the track. The other guy started from the opposite end, ended up in completely different areas where they couldn't just connect the two. And that principle exactly holds good.
Yeah.
It takes both a top down and a bottom up to collaborate and converge at some level for results to start happening.
Sure. I got it. There is a question that both of you can respond to, Jaya and Maheep. And before that, a lot of you have been asking if this recording is going to be available. Let me repeat again. Visit inhafindia.org first thing in the morning tomorrow, by which time we will see how this is fixed, and this recording is available on the archives. The entire thing, including Jaya's presentation. Many of you have asked for Jaya's presentation. That will also be there together. Jaya and Maheep, you can take it to the way you want to. You talked about competitive cities or making cities competitive. Is that right, Jaya? Right? Now, the question to you is, Bangalore today is the worst place, says G.K. Bhatt, to expand now, considering climate change, water scarcity. You must remember we are a kilometer above the sea level. Can alternatives be found where we disaggregate? In 1983, we talked about this, of industrializing as well as, spreading industry and such things into the hinterland of Bangalore. Nothing happened. I want you to see if you want to say something about how you make a city like Bangalore competitive, not because I live here, but because that could serve as an example for others, while Maheep will come from the town planning context for the same question.
So I'll just I'll start with the previous question about, what is the ideal size of the city and, when should a city expand and when should it stop? Yeah. So the question is not that. The thing is that whether we like it or not, Delhi NCR region is going to be the largest megalopolis, metropolis in the world by 2050, right? So cities have this attraction power. They have this whole agglomeration economy, which you can't ignore. So while we as planners are looking at balanced regional growth, balanced regional economic growth, but the reality is that a lot of the workforce, a lot of the industries go to cities which are established, and they don't want to take risks in newer areas. So that is something that I want to baseline. The second thing in terms of Bangalore and how to make it competitive. Really, it starts with, going back to what Richard Florida said, right? It's creative, the rise of the creative class and attracting the creative class to the city. You have to start with getting the right kind of talent, retaining that talent, and retaining that talent will require you to make your neighborhoods livable. So how do you make your neighborhoods livable? That is something that you have to do in a decentralized fashion. You have to make the city livable for its residents. It has to have tolerance, cultural tolerance and other kinds of tolerance. And then it has to be aided by technology so that, things are accessible like they are now to us, despite of the situation where we can't meet in person. So I think this will still hold true for Bangalore. And Bangalore also needs to find its competitive edge as it relates to manufacturing. So we have a lot of workforce in the service sector, in the IT sector. Manufacturing is somewhere where we can kind of choose to focus. For example, in the EV, in the electric vehicle segment, which is now just coming up, can we kind of bring the best in class to this city and kind of expand? But all this, of course, needs to happen with the right sort of resource base and the infrastructure.
I got that. I got that. Okay, there are many more questions from, from Ishani Mehta, then I've got something else from Archana Gaikwad. These are long comments and observations that you're making. Very valid, I will say to you both, Ishani and Archana. But what I would suggest is that we put this up as part of this larger archive that we are building at INHAF.India.org. We will request our alliance partners, WRI and ADAPT and of course BNP and such, to see if they want to also sort of link this to their sites and have more people see what you have written here. I think that will be a more enduring exercise than my taking this up and discussing with these people. The one question from Sandeep Aniruddhan. I don't know who wants to take this. Maybe Srikanth. What are the chances, Srikanth, that we can arrive at a zero impact apartment? Can appliances be developed that no sewage leaves the building, no waste leaves the building? Can technology, which is available today, as you know, be motivated? Can become a motivation to create solutions like these that can be retrofitted into existing buildings and homes and offices and industry? Srikanth. That's from Sandeep Aniruddhan.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandeep. Indeed, I know Sandeep is one of those warriors in Bangalore who's fighting for sustainability.
Okay,
the
great.
problem with doing retrofitting is that in some cases it's practically not possible. In some cases it's extremely cumbersome. And what I keep telling people is, please remember that when citizens are running an apartment complex as managing committee, right? It's an extremely tough job. There are day-to-day issues.
I know,
there are
it's possible.
Other issues that keep happening. So thinking of very, very complex projects or thinking of big projects is extremely tough. So yes, to the extent that the government can incentivize older complexes to move towards more sustainable systems is definitely welcome. So there should be more of an incentive mechanism given to people. But what is very appalling is that the government doesn't think about mandating many of these things for the newer development that keeps happening. Every year, there are at least about 1,000 to 1,500 new apartment complexes that get added. And these are all apartment complexes which are generally huge, right? Older Bengaluru had a lot of apartments which are smaller, 10, 12, 20, 40, 50, etc. These days, you will find more of the hundreds, 200s, 300s, even thousands. If you're able to bring in regulations which govern how new constructions need to happen, the solution lies there. So at the planning, design, and construction stage, if you're able to build in these elements of sustainability, it's a lot easier to bring that into force. Once an apartment is constructed, it's very difficult to then go back and make a lot of changes because of lack of time, because of design changes that need to happen. And there is a space, constraint, because there are 100 things that somebody can do. You can only do, let's say, 5 of them. So I think policy needs to recognize that new development needs to be properly governed and regulated. That's really where the solution is.
Okay.
But it's possible.
Sure.
Over a period of Hari, I've been inspired. You asked, are you inspired by others? I'm inspired by somebody like Hari. He developed zero discharge buildings way back in the 2000s, when the concept itself was not very, very fancy at all. So yes, it's possible. We can get there, but it's very difficult to retrofit. It has to be more prospective. We should incentivize it. Absolutely.
Sure, that was very gracious of you. But Sandeep, I must tell you this. You are a guy right after my heart. We will discuss offline. Zero discharge, eminently possible. It's happening today. That shift in technology we have seen between 2014 and 16 and such. Okay, Bindu Madhav, he's making a comment. He's a very, very senior, wonderful guy. One of those people who thinks every day is a Sunday, and he does nothing else but sit, reflect, and sometimes share wonderful insights. He says, Is there a way like that minister, I think it was the deputy chief minister in the previous regime, Jaya in Karnataka, he wants to know, can we pause the growth of Bangalore for a few years? By the time we try to make ends meet, the ends get to move. And that you could say of every city today. Maheep?
Yeah, okay. You want me to be the first one?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is, I know, it's probably a dream for people who are in power or people who think seriously about cities, about city size, regulation, kind of restricting growth until we upgrade our infrastructure, But I feel that from my practical experience in the consulting field or in the practice, I would say, that it's not possible to do either this or that. It has to be parallel. So it is the intention may be good, but how to operationalize it or do it practically, it's going to be very, very difficult. But it has to be focused on infrastructure upgradation for the core city areas. This has to be a priority, and it has to be reflected in the investments, the budgeting, the engineering on technological input, and the people's participation. We have to upgrade it.
In a sense, you are agreeing with Bindu Madhav. Are you saying that?
Well, partly, yes.
Good, yeah. Jaya, to you, but two people asking somewhat the same kind of question or sharing, let's say. Nivedita Ravindranath and the other guy is Saurav Chowdhury. They both want to know if you believe, all of us believe, that by rationalizing the price factor, you'll create an ecosystem for efficient technologies and other practices to come downstream, and for, of course, changing behavior of consumers. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think it's a cost thing. It's also, I think it's an awareness plus cost thing, because at the end of the day, as an RWA or member or as an apartment owner, all I care about is my per square foot, the maintenance bill. And so if someone can show me that doesn't get impacted too heavily and there's a better technology which is going to also help me, make my services efficient, then absolutely yes. And I think we are heading there. I think we are there, and with Vikas's solution, with many other solutions, we are there where the price point is very right. With solar, that has happened, with solar panels.
Right.
I think we are there. I think it just needs that whole regulatory push to make it a mandate and not, be selectively applied to different complexes based on their awareness and their access to information and services.
Right. Though I mentioned Maheep, the 74th Amendment before you presented, let me read what Muralidhar Rao has offered to all of us. He says, implementation, this is interesting, and something that, INHAF has also got to take up as it, studies what it will over the next 3 months. Implementation of the 74th Amendment in its true spirit is a crying need. Then he says, in that respect, we have the brilliant B.S. Patil Committee's report for restructuring Bangalore city governance. I'm sure you've seen that, Maheep. Jaya is nodding her head, so she must have seen that too. What is needed is use of our collective might to push for its implementation fastest. That's one of the reasons Muralidhar Rao is a senior member of the BNP also, that Srikanth leads in some ways as General Secretary. Any comments on that? Or, yeah, go on, please.
And simply because WRI had drafted some of that report. So the point is, yes, we need collective might to push that through. But I think the biggest resistance we've met with is, when we talk about bifurcation of Bangalore, or basically, this whole decentralized system, people don't want to forego their power, right? So they don't want to let go of their whole boundaries, the power dynamics that exist. And that is the biggest hindrance to saying decentralization is the way to go. There are things to do. For example, we've talked about the centralized databases. Somehow, but that again, they're centralized data, but if that's not getting shared with the right kind of people, with researchers and other people who can kind of tell you what you're doing right, where things need to be adjusted, then again, no use, just having and holding on to that data. So yes, we totally need to push it with all our might, but I think that requires a whole mindset change.
Sure. Srikanth, someone acknowledges what you said about filing a water return like you file an income tax return. Can you, that's Bhakti Devi, who is also a water warrior of sorts. Now, can you maybe in about 20, 30 seconds, say something about it before I go to the next guy. Lots of wonderful insights here. Srikanth, or Maheep, you wanted to say something, I thought.
No, before that, I know Srikanth is the right person to answer this.
Correct.
2 points is somebody mentioned about villages or autonomy at the local level. I think, and then Jaya mentioned mandatory kind of mechanisms.
Sure,
at some point of time, we have to make the system move towards some of the things have to become mandatory. Number one.
Yeah.
Because if we wait for people to change, it may take time. I'm not pessimistic about it, but it's a big challenge. And the second thing is about own generation, whether it's electricity power generated at home through solar or decentralized management at the local level, that has to happen. Otherwise, at the city scale, we can't have 20 kilometers, 50 kilometers. The trucks are flying the garbage from one end to the other end of the city and dumping somewhere. It's not going to end. So while the population is not going to stop.
Okay. Srikanth, water returns. Before I ask something else of Jaya, another interesting insight from somebody else. Srikanth, on the water returns, anything that you want to say in about 20, 30 seconds?
Essentially, the concept of water returns, in fact, I've been noting water returns for individual households and environmental returns for communities and apartment
sorry to cut in. More than the how, if you can tell us of this process of filing the return, how do you think a government will want to respond to that? How do we take this and make it acceptable?
Effectively, most of the people pay water bills. The water returns process is integrated along with the bill payment. Whether you do it online or whether there's a form that you have which forces people to fill it in. Just like filing income tax returns, now whether people are truthful about what they are declaring or not, it's secondary. The fact that you have water returns improves accountability, builds awareness among people on what they need to be doing or not doing, overall increases transparency in the system. It also creates a system by which the government can get data to see where interventions are needed. So at a very fundamental level, just introducing a system like that, I believe will enhance accountability and will move towards, and when I say accountability at an individual level.
We know
when we have seen when we have seen water meters at an individual household level reduce consumption by 30% plus, at an individual household level, if we are able to get people to file water returns, I think it will be a game changer.
Absolutely. These IoT-based flow meters have made a dramatic change in homes. Simply the fact that I know how much water I'm consuming is making a difference to many. And 2 weeks ago, or was it 3 weeks ago, the government decided that they will make it mandatory. And I think it's a very progressive and positive step. For once, the government has done something that is important and is useful for all water users. To you, Jaya, a question from a person called Anil Dev, a dear friend too. He says, it's time to ensure a fair deal to that commuter, and the guy who lives in the slum, who can't spend, who earns maybe 12 to 15,000 rupees. He says, your point about metro not taking into account the real travel needs is sensible. Let me know if there is a forum where citizens can contribute to such a cause.
I think forums such as these, and just engage with the people who are kind of engage with BMTC, engage with BMRC, and Murlidhar, other people who here on have done that. And I think forums you need to basically be talking directly with government agencies.
I'm with you. Well, there's so many of them. There's another guy called Venu Pandey who says something else. I'll leave out things that, somebody says, I don't agree with half bucket bathing. Individual social responsibility is something that we need to take up at one level, while we need to bring in, technology shifts of the kind that can make a difference. For example, the next generation of I think I'm that fossilized generation who will own the last ICE car. By 2025, I don't think anyone will want to own cars if you are between 25, 35, 40. And that means you're going to take away about a third, maybe about 50% of the cars off the parking areas in a city. And that is area that is going to get released. Whether you like it or not, by 2025, 2030, we're clearly going to have no owned cars which run only 200,000 kilometers. You will have these electric vehicles which have only 20 parts against 2,000 parts of an ICE car. And that means that you're going to have cars which will be given warranties for a life at 800,000 kilometers. A taxi driver is going to love it. An Uber and an Ola will love it. Tesla has ordered for 100,000 cars from somebody or the other. Tesla has got an order from Amazon, I think, or Google or somebody like that for 2021 delivery. I don't know what happens post-COVID. But my point is that these consumer preferences are changing dramatically, which is going to impact positively when it comes to sustainability without us beating our breasts on sustainable, elements that we need to be bringing in. Is that right, Jaya? I'm going back to what Muralidhar says, that is. And Anil.
Yes, absolutely. I think we are heading towards this whole shared economy systems, and not just in cars. I mean, it's with housing, with many other areas. We are headed towards this whole shared economy, where when that land gets freed up, we can just hope and we can just institute the framework used for the right purposes.
Okay, it's 6:34. I know all things have to come to an end. Good things. Last maybe 1 minute for each of you to see if you want to leave a message, not simply for the listeners here, but for the urban planners in these listeners here, and people who really care. Starting with Srikanth.
At a macro level, Maheep did bring that point out. The city direly needs a metropolitan planning commission. There's another person I saw that had posted a view on the group around integrating the organization, or probably it came in one of the presentations. There's BESCOM, there's BWSSB, there's BDA, there's
they all have to speak to each other. That's right.
There is a dire need for integrating all these and making sure that they all talk to one another very, very closely, even if they remain as separate agencies. So overall, from a planning perspective, if there is a central metropolitan planning commission as mandated by the 74th Amendment, which all of us have been talking of and we know about it, if we have greater integration between the agencies, I think automatically, and with as much of decentralization as we need to do for ward level management, after that it's just about planners getting into create those simple systems and processes at the local level to bring about sustainability at the local.
Sure. There's another interesting insight from Padhu Padmanabhan. Community-based social marketing has been shown to be very effective in fostering sustainable behavior in water and energy conservation, he says. And then he adds, campaigns that rely solely on providing information have little or no effect on human behavior. Research in social psychology at the community level and involving direct contact with people is the key. Do city and municipal authorities have the smarts to do this? Maheep, because you are dealing with these guys all the time.
I think it's a long journey. Some steps have been taken, probably baby steps. Some precedents are there, but that's the journey we need to take. As I'm saying again and again, for a city of 10 million plus, normal systems of governance or civic service provision is not going to work. Each and every citizen has to become a partner. It's going to be very tough to develop mechanisms of communication, feedback, then kind of redoing systems and improving and dynamic systems. Planning systems have to become dynamic. Cities are dynamic.
Sure. So, Jaya? Sorry. So,
please go. That's it.
Okay. Jaya, you want to respond to that?
No, I'm just going to give last thoughts, respond to that. Basically, I think as planners, we need to demand healthy cities now. That should be the new focus, is healthy cities. And also set measurable targets. When we're getting a master plan activity or any such activity, there should be a measurable goal and a target that should be attached to everything. How do we know that we've arrived at a certain place? Have we done better than the previous year? Have we not? So that's one. And the second, I think the last point I would leave is about, again, the informal economy workers. And the point is that, we want to bring them back and they will come back. But I think there's a time, this is the point to kind of reset our thinking about them. We cannot have them engaging selectively with regulatory laws. You can't say, you need a bank account, you need a license, but oh, by the way, we're not going to take care of your working conditions or, how the things are going on in the construction or environmental laws which aren't enforced. So I think we need to think about them in a more humane manner.
Well, it's really way past what we planned, but thank you so much. There's at least one half of the people who started off with us are still with us. Thank you so much. And what is important is this: both these sets of observations that have come on chat as well as on the Q&A window are going to be recorded, are going to be archived and put to good use by researchers. How at the back end, the Secretariat of INHAF will want to take this, work with a small team of urban planners and such, to see that this forms part of that effort at City URI is another challenge that INHAF has decided to assume, and I'm sure that they will do what they have set out as an ambitious target for themselves. Thank you, Jaya, so much. Thank you, Srikanth. I mean, I really need to thank you for, sort of coming in every time with these very, very sharp and persistent, shall we say, directions that you think the city has to be taking. What can I say, Maheep? Like you said yesterday to me and this morning again, the big picture, you stuck to that. And well, I mean, that's been your training and your experience, formidable as it is. Well, I suppose it's time to sort of leave now. And we'll keep in touch. From INHAF, we will come back to you. We'll see how we can partner this process, as Kirti Shah says. And we need to do a great deal more. And you can see that. One of Jaya's colleagues, he's from WRA for Washington, D.C., is coming in on another show on the 23rd, I think, June 23rd. While June 17th, we have K.T. Ravindran, Anup Naik, and a few others who are going to be holding a session. So there is this, lovely series of thought seminars. And I think this is a festival of great ideas that we all need to be part of. Thank you so much once again for being here. Good evening to all of you. That's it from INHAF Studios here. Yeah, thanks, bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Hari. Thanks, INHAF, and thanks to all the people who attended.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks,
It was a great session. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
All
Srikanth.
the best. Thank you. Bye.
Absolutely.